Let's start off by getting your reaction to the news that James Trafford could be returning to Man City this summer. City are understood to have approached Burnley over re-signing the 22-year-old goalkeeper who was sold for around £15 million to the Clarets in 2023, 2 years ago. It's understood that City want to negotiate on the £40 million buyback clause that they've got to sort of reduce that fee for Trafford, who's also been linked with Newcastle throughout this summer, but they are now believed to have
Hmm.
pulled out of the running for him. So now that City have entered the race, Trafford's said to be keen to join City, but that his arrival may depend on the departure of first choice goalkeeper Ederson, who has allegedly agreed personal terms with Galatasaray, and they are soon expected to table a formal offer. Although Ederson said early this summer that he intends to stay at City, it seems now as if an exit is a genuine possibility, and therefore Trafford could be the
Yeah.
man to succeed him at Man City. So, Stephen, what are your thoughts on Trafford potentially returning to City, and does Ederson leaving and Trafford coming in excite you as a City fan this summer?
Yeah, it excites me personally. Like it doesn't excite me Ederson leaving. That's the wrong word. I do feel to put it briefly about Ederson. I think his time is sort of. I think he's had his peak. He's only 31, which is not over a goalkeeper, admittedly. But I think there's a mitigating factors at play here. You know, there's the treble malaise, which absolutely is a thing. You know, when you've achieved so much at any team, sometimes you do need a refresh. And I think it's very obvious that last summer Ederson had his head turned. There was the sort of shenanigans around or not wanting to come off against Spurs, and Ortega went in goal, made that big save. Ortega got a few starts after that. I think it definitely knocked Ederson's confidence a little bit. And then obviously there was the rumours around the Saudi move, which he very obviously wanted. You know, he came out and said he didn't want it afterwards, but I think he had his head turned by a new challenge, a lot of money over in the Saudi league as well. And I think last season he was fine, had some good moments, some good assists, of course, as well. But I think it's fair to say that Ederson has done everything he needs to possibly do at Manchester City. He's done everything he can achieve at Man City. You know, the run of trophies and success, it wouldn't have been possible without him. And I do feel you can tell when a player is looking elsewhere. And I think all these links to other clubs, they don't come about unless the player and their agent are welcoming those options. So I think it's time for him to move on because I think he wants it. And at that point, at elite level, if you're not 100% in, even 1% out, it makes a difference. It just does make a difference. And look, the consequences of your actions aren't felt quite as harshly if you've got, 1 foot out the door. So I think it's the right time. And that's for James Trafford. Look, I'm a massive James Trafford fan. I've been watching him several years, and that's not exaggeration. I spoke to him before personally as well. Like, he's an extremely confident young lad. Yeah, a very talented young goalkeeper. I once replied to an Instagram story of his about a pass that he did. I said, moving like Ederson there. He went, nah, moving like myself. I'm like, there we go. That was like when he was a bit younger there. Extreme self confidence. But rightfully so. He's justified it. Most famously, of course, in the was it under 20s, under 21s,
Under 21 Euros, I think, or
under
under
21
20.
Euros,
Yeah,
where he
yeah.
didn't concede a single goal for England, and broke records for Burnley, I think, last year in terms of number of clean sheets and so on. But more than that, James Trafford, he has the right mentality and the right attitude to be at City. So much of goalkeeping is at the highest level is confidence and self belief, and you won't meet a more cocksure lad than James Trafford. And he's always felt he was good enough to be Manchester City's number one. He said that when leaving Burnley and so on. He said that he want to come back as number one day. And look, he may be a little bit more rough around the edges compared to a Diogo Costa or someone like that. But I look at Ederson. Ederson only had about 40, 50 games or something like that at a top flight experience when he joined Manchester City. He was only very young, and obviously it was a slightly higher level with Benfica, but he's played in the Premier League already. The Championship is an incredibly difficult league. He's got lots of experience. He's been in the England squad too as well. Um, James Trafford has the quality. He absolutely does. I truly believe that I was sort of wrong there, by the way. I meant for Benfica. I know he played for Rio Ave before and Ederson, but he was still only pretty young when he joined Manchester City in terms of like Champions League experience and that kind of stuff. But yeah, James Trafford absolutely, in my opinion, has the quality, and it would be another success for the routes that some of these players could take. A lot's made about City moving on for some young players like Cole Palmer and Morgan Rogers, people like that, Romeo Lavia, that players that could have solved issues in the current squad. You'd argue. And often they have buyback clauses, and City don't. They don't activate them. Liam Delap's another. He could have been a perfectly good backup to Haaland. It looks like James Trafford might be the first to go and come back actually as an established first teamer potentially. Having had that developmental period a couple of years away from the club, then come back and fulfill his potential, his promise. And I know for a fact a lot of people at City really rate James Trafford. He's got so much ability. So for me, as a City fan, as a pretty uh, big fan of the academy sides and watching them develop. It does mean more to me when you see an academy player breakthrough. Not necessarily a City fan, but he's been in the club for an awful long time. I think he's a Chelsea fan actually. I saw an interview of him when he was like a lot younger. I think he was a Chelsea fan from the Lake District, which is an odd one. But I think was it the Peaks or the Lakes? One of them anyway. But he clearly loves the club. He was there from a very young age. Clearly very talented, and it would clearly be a successful sort of step away. And bear in mind, it'd be a decent profit because not a decent profit. It would be like a decent fee because they sold him what 15 to 20 million or something like
Yeah.
that. Even if it's 40 million, they'd be paying essentially 20, 25 million for his development for a number one keeper. Most teams would do that at the top level. You could do that. So yeah, I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, he's someone that's very highly rated. In the words of Burnley boss Scott Parker, Trafford is a special goalkeeper who has absolute humongous potential. So that will be, music to City's ears if he does return.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was fantastic for them in the Championship last season. Kept conceded just 16 goals, kept 29 clean sheets in 45 Championship games to win the Golden Glove and help Burnley secure promotion back to the Premier League. He's got 2 years left now on his contract at Turf Moor, and he has been tipped for that move to a bigger club. But he does want to play regularly. He wants to give himself that best possible chance of earning a spot in Thomas Tuchel's England squad for the World Cup next year. So, a move to Man City for Trafford would only really make sense if he's assured that regular first team football under Guardiola. And so, do you think that Trafford has shown enough to make that big step up from sort of the top end of the Championship to the top end of the Premier League? Because it is a big jump for any player, and he's only 22, but he has got that potential, hasn't he, to potentially do that?
Yeah, 22, 23 in October. So he's not like the young end of 22. So by the time the season gets going, he'll be nearly 23, and which is still young. But at that point, he would have played an awful lot of football as well. It's not like as well like he's just some kid who's not really played much. Of course, he had a loan at Accrington Stanley 4 or 5 years ago, and then at Bolton for a couple of years as well, then Burnley for a couple of years. So he's had 5 or 6 years, of senior football at that point. And look, with keepers the pressure comes into it, but largely the keeper's role is you know what you're doing in a keeper role. Obviously, like you can you can see they will face the quality of shot, not maybe as much, but at some point as they will at any level. The finishing won't be as consistent, but it'll be there to they'll reach the standards. We'll have faced the shot at Accrington Stanley as good as a Premier League shot. Not as often, if that makes sense, but they can still hit a ball, at that level. The point is, you can see his shot stopping ability at any level. And then it's about consistency, and then it's about confidence and conviction. Of course, the pressing will be more aggressive if he's playing it out from the back. It'll be more demanding, but you could argue that he probably had less to do than he ever would at any club, because you're playing for Man City, you're not having a lot of shots to save compared to, Burnley in the last season, maybe not because they were so good defensively, but Burnley in the Premier League or Bolton before that. He's going to probably have a very similar time as he did for England, where he was excellent, kept loads of clean sheets in the side that passed the ball out and played good football. And he can pass it out, by the way. He's very good. He's remarkably good with the ball at his feet. Maybe not quite Ederson, but if Ederson's a 10 out of 10, James is at least a 9. He's like Ederson is a freakish one of one that way. But I don't think you have to be the very best in the world passing to be successful in the passing side. Look, PSG, most impressive side in the world last season. Donnarumma isn't hardly Ederson, is he? He's probably not even Ortega with the ball at his feet, Donnarumma. And they were still absolutely great and more than suitable. So yeah, I'm not. I think Trafford has everything other than experience. And if you don't have experience, you have to ask a lot then about his mentality. There is no doubts whatsoever. You will struggle to meet a more confident young man. He little bit of Joe Hart actually in terms of self belief that way, and I think you have to have a little bit of that sort of ego in a good way, that confidence, borderline arrogance to be a great goalkeeper because you've got to be fearless um and I think that will carry him well at Manchester City. And I don't see why you'd sign him personally and not have him number one at this point, given the fact that, Ortega's a good keeper, but you don't sign someone like James Trafford and bring him back to be back up to Ortega. It doesn't make any sense to me. The money that you'd spend would imply that he's going to be a number one keeper. Same fee that we pay for Ederson potentially, give or take. So yeah, I've got no concerns. There might be the odd moment here and there, but he does not strike me as the kind of guy who's going to be concerned by this. He actually strikes me as the kind of guy who could be City's number one for 10 years and England number one for 10 years. And I think, given that he's a safe bet, we know everything about how he plays. City trust him implicitly because they understand him. All the coaches understand him. He's probably trained with Pep multiple times already as well in the past. I think it makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, and the fact as well that Trafford's homegrown is a huge plus for City as well as they try to comply with those
Absolutely.
homegrown quota rules ahead of next season. And Trafford spent 8 years at City between 2015 and 2023. So yeah, that's a big boost for City. It's also been reported if Trafford were to leave Burnley, then of course Burnley will be in the market for a new goalkeeper, and City Stefan Ortega is believed to be one of a number of players that they are looking at. Do you think that City would allow Ortega to leave as well as Ederson this summer? And if so, do you think City would then need to sign another number two? Of course, they've signed Marcus Bettinelli this summer, but he's sort of coming as a number three to replace Scott Carson, who's gone now. So, what are your thoughts on Ortega potentially leaving as well as Ederson this summer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you don't want to lose both your keepers in one summer, but sometimes we're in the season of change right now, and there's an awful lot of upheaval at Manchester City. And if he wants to go, I I truly believe that if a player wants to go and the head's turned, sort of let him within reason if you get the good offer and good deal. I subscribe to that theory. I think it's sensible. I think you don't want players who don't want to be there. I mean, some professional enough anyway to crack on and do a good job because I'm contradicting myself there. Bernardo Silva, for example, he never had a problem with Man City. He just wanted to live somewhere probably nicer and sunnier than Manchester. I get that, but he was still incredibly professional and worked really hard. And you could probably argue Ortega is very similar. His mentality. He's a very likable man, Ortega, from what I know, and very professional and takes his job very seriously. But he's earned the right as well to move on and be a first choice somewhere if he wants to. I don't know who City would bring in. There's some rumours this morning that Diogo Costa might be back on the cards, but that is two number one keepers there, two keepers who want to be. Then you're looking at a near 100 million outlay on two goalkeepers, which is I don't know how you even get a backup keeper then to Trafford. I don't know who it could be. I've got genuinely no idea, so I couldn't sit here and pull a name out of the hat. But you do need one because Bettinelli's not been brought in to be number two. He'd be our third choice. So, yeah, it would be essential if Ortega goes. I don't think City would stand in the way too aggressively if someone brought in decent money for him. I think they would demand a fee, though. I think Ederson will go for a surprisingly cheap fee because of his um, time at City and sort of like the respect between the two parties. But I think with Ortega at that point, he becomes the sort of fall guy there. Like, well, you can't walk out on a free, mate. We need a backup keeper. You're gonna have to bring in a fee of some kind, and I think City are in a situation where they have no choice but to go out and get someone because they'd just be too short otherwise.